There is no real Muslim who doesn't want Spain back. Not only Spain, but the entire world. No real Muslim who doesn't believe that Islam will eventually control the entire world. No real Muslim who doesn't believe that the rule of Allah will be established and non-Muslims will be subjugated. If a Muslim tells you that, no, I don't believe this, he is lying to you. Because a real Muslim believes in what God has commanded. And God in the Quran, He said, anyone who rules with what Allah has not revealed, that is the disbeliever. And what do you do to disbeliever? Fight them until they are humiliated, subjugated, and pay the jizya or die.
Danny Bermawi, you grew up a devout Muslim in Jordan, but now, as a follower of Yeshua, you've dedicated a large part of your professional life to exposing the strange relationship between Islamists and the hardcore progressive left. But before we get to that, my friend, how did you come to know Yeshua?
In 2006 or 2005, a Danish cartoonist drew the Prophet of Islam, Muhammad. Many people remember what happened back then. That act just sent waves of rage across the Islamic world. There were protesters on the streets for months. And at the time, the environment was emotionally charged. If you're a Muslim, and the way it was framed is that the West, the infidel West, is attacking the Prophet of Peace, is plotting against Islam, and it is our responsibility to defend the Prophet, defend Islam in face of those infidels. There was an imam, a Kuwaiti imam, he preached a sermon. It's called, O Nation of Muhammad, Ya Ummat Muhammad in Arabic. And that sermon just, really transformed how I see the word because suddenly I realized at the time that I was not living for a purpose, for a higher purpose. So I decided to dedicate my life to defend Islam and to promote Islam, to defend the Prophet. And that happened. I completely changed. I started wearing the same outfit that you would see on radicals today, I would say. I started going to the mosque 5 times a day. And 1 year later, I left Islam. So that year was, it was long, even though it's short, but it was long because it took me through a spiritual journey, reading about the history of Islam, reading the Quran. Muslims read the Quran not to understand, but to worship. It's a ritual. But when you decide that you want to defend Islam, then you start reading it to understand so that you could explain it to others. Reading about the life of Muhammad, his actions, his sayings, it took me a year. I was not wired to accept that as a divine revelation. So yeah, I just left Islam, and a friend who converted to Christianity, but he was keeping it a secret because I didn't know that at the time, but when he came out as a Christian, he had a lot of troubles. They took his wife. He was put in jail for a few weeks. Then he had to convert back to Islam in order to, get his family back. So at the time, he was claiming that he was a Muslim. And I was, struggling with leaving Islam, and he recommended that I read the Bible. And he didn't actually recommend it because, as a way of, he didn't say that, oh, the Bible is better, go and read it. He was like, well, all religions they're full of myths, and why don't you read the Bible if you want to, just to explore, other religions. He was trying to, push me to read about Jesus, but it was not obvious at that point. But anyway, I ended up reading the Gospel of Matthew and confronting Jesus for the first time. And the contrast, man, between Jesus and Muhammad. But not only that, it's the false image that Islam planted in our minds about Jesus. Jesus in Islam, many Muslims would say, or all Muslims would say, oh, we respect Jesus, we love Jesus. But the truth is that Jesus is distorted in Islam. It's not the same person. And he was manufactured to serve the agenda of Muhammad. When you confront the real Jesus throughout the pages of the Christian Bible, that changes everything if you're a Muslim. And that's what happened to me. It was, of course, from a theological perspective today, I believe that it was the sovereign grace of God that drew me near. It was not me, it was not my intellect, not my effort. But from a human perspective, that was the moment I would say just, was sure Islam was behind me.
When we talk to former Muslims, one of the things you often hear is, we were culturally Muslim. We had a basic understanding. It was more identity, especially if we lived in the West, than it was even theologically. But a common thing that you hear is that when folks actually start to read the Quran and read the Hadiths and really understand what's happening, they usually go one of two ways, which is extreme hardcore 7th century recreation of Islam, or there's like a questioning where it's like, wait a second, hold on. And then more often than not, we hear is we were told not to question. Islam means submit. Don't even question. So before you started reading the New Testament, you mentioned that you started questioning Islam as you were going to the mosque 5 times a day, as you were digging into the Quran and the Hadith. What about that investigation was starting to crack your, I guess, devotion to Islam?
First of all, there's the West sometimes project its own understanding of things onto other cultures. So when you say cultural Muslim, you might imagine a cultural Jew or a cultural Christian, and you just juxtapose with a cultural Muslim, but that is not how it works. Because Islam is not only religion, just like Christianity or Judaism, where if you choose not to practice it, then you're a nominal or culture Christian. Islam is a total ideology. So whether you are committed, devout, or not, you live saturated with Islam. You live by the conditions that Islam imposes on the society. So when people say I'm a cultural Muslim or I was a cultural Muslim, listen, up until 2006, when I decided to become devout, I was a cultural Muslim. But what does that mean? I was a real Muslim. I was a Muslim. I believed in Allah. I believed in the Quran. I believed in Muhammad. I believed in Muhammad's companions, because in Sunni Islam, his companions are as important any pillar of the faith. So the difference is practicing the rituals, but the belief itself, it's there. A cultural Christian, if you talk to a Christian who is not really, devout, they might say, you know what, Jesus probably was a great teacher. I don't know if there is a God. Maybe there's a God. I don't know if God is a female or a male. You know what I mean? It's like there's no fundamental doctrines that you hold to. You are just nominal. You call yourself Christian, but you're not really. In Islam, however, there's no such thing. You can't be a Muslim and say, well, I don't know if Muhammad existed, for example. That doesn't work. You can't be a Muslim or even a cultural Muslim and say the infidels, the non-Muslims are going to heaven. It doesn't exist. You believe in certain things that non-negotiable. If you deny any of them, immediately you lose the privilege of being called a Muslim. So a cultural Muslim in this framework is a Muslim who believes in all of these things, who believes in the Quran, all the teachings of Muhammad, but doesn't practice, doesn't pray, doesn't fast. So on the level of belief, he is still a hardcore Muslim. That's why the majority of Muslims worldwide, they are hardcore Muslims. Even if they call themselves cultural Muslims, it doesn't matter. Ask any one of them. They never go to the mosque. They never read the Quran. Ask them, do you believe in Muhammad? Yes. Do you believe in the sanctity of Muhammad? Yes. If someone attacks Muhammad, would you wish that person harm? Yes. So that is the problem in Islam, because it's a total ideology. Now, the other question, what made me disenchanted with Islam? What made me, what broke this commitment? I would say the life of Muhammad, mainly. Just going through the pages of the Quran, and there is something in Islam called the reason of revelation. It's like why this verse or that verse was revealed. And there is always a story or a context why it was given by Allah to Muhammad. And you find out that the Quran was always revealed in convenience. It's like to serve Muhammad's agenda, to get him out of a hard situation, to support his argument against his enemies, to endorse his actions. So it's obvious that the Quran was designed to serve Muhammad. And then it was globalized as a religion for everyone. I'll give you an example. So Muhammad had an adopted son, his name is Zayd, and his adopted son got married to Muhammad's cousin. And this person, his name is Zayd, he was just like us, a real son to Muhammad. He called Muhammad dad, and his wife considered Muhammad for many years as her father-in-law. One day, according to the most authentic Islamic sources, Muhammad went to his son's house, and there was a cover at the door, and God sent wind, and the wind removed the cover, and he saw his daughter-in-law while naked. And he saw that she was so beautiful. And he said, "Oh, praise Allah for this beauty." So Muhammad, he had a crush on her, the daughter-in-law. But he was afraid, like, what am I going to do? Because people are going to crucify me if I... It's like, you cannot have a crush on your daughter-in-law. So Allah in the Quran, believe it or not, he talking to Muhammad in Surah Al-Ahzab, and he is rebuking Muhammad for not wanting to pursue his desire. He's saying, "Oh, Muhammad, you're hiding in your heart what Allah is going to reveal because you're afraid of people? Who cares about people? God cancels or prohibits adoption, and therefore Zayd is no longer a son of Muhammad. Zayd divorces his wife, and Allah says in the Quran, and you marry her." So Allah admits in these verses that Muhammad desires his daughter-in-law, and Muhammad was afraid of people's reaction, what they're going to say, because, pre-Islam Arabia had higher standards for morality than Muhammad himself. So, and Allah, of course, he married Zainab, his daughter-in-law, to him, and now she's his wife. So when you read that, if you're a Muslim, you don't critically think about it. Like, you don't examine what's going on there. You just, Muhammad is so sacred. But if you're questioning and you read that story, it's one story of like thousands of similar stories in Islam, and you're like, what's going on here? So it's so scandalous.
Well, and then you have the story of Aisha that's kind of become a viral talking point. The idea that he married a 6-year-old, consummated at 9. And what's really interesting is there's this theology in Islam that, Muhammad was like the perfect guy to be like Muhammad. But then you read the stories of Muhammad. So here's the thing, David and Solomon and Abraham, they were instruments of God, but we're not necessarily supposed to do everything that they did, right? David messed up with Bathsheba. Abraham messed up with Hagar. Solomon had his issues. The only one that we're supposed to actually emulate is Jesus. But in Islam, it seems like there's a theological idea to emulate Muhammad. But man, there seems to be a lot of yikes in there. So why do folks from the Islamic world not notice these things?
How would you notice these things when you were programmed on a certain roof or ceiling for morality? The standards had already been implanted. It's there. So you don't get to see beyond it. Anything beyond the standard is seen as false, even if it looks good. For example, I was talking to my uncle who's a Muslim. And I remember that this is like years ago. I was like, in the Bible, Jesus says, loves your enemy. And he spent like an hour explaining to me why loving your enemy is a bad thing. So you have to find a way to explain everything Muhammad did as the right thing, and everything that Muhammad didn't do as the wrong thing. So is a thing good because it is good, or because Muhammad did it, or Allah commands it? It is good because Muhammad did it, not because it's good in itself. If Muhammad commanded something against what you see is good, or what other people see as good, then that good is not really good. So this formula is what keeps the Islamic world stagnated morally And of course, when a society is stagnated morally, it stagnates on every other level. And thank God for the oil in the Gulf. Otherwise, no Islamic country would be better than Somalia.
Well, then we have to talk about what you've dedicated a lot of your professional life to. This idea, this call it Islamism, this kind of I don't know. You could maybe you can help us define what that actually means. But then there's this weird thing. It's almost inexplicable, where there is this Islamism, which is this like 7th century Arabia, medieval kind of way of looking at the world, and then hardcore progressive leftism in the West, which is literally antithetical to every single tenet of this Islamism. LGBTQ, women's this, that, and the other, abortion. I mean, literally everything. And yet they're married in the United States and the West. They're working together. And I know you've dedicated a lot of you've written books about this. What on earth is happening, my friend?
First of all, there's no such a thing as Islamism. Islamism is a term that was developed in the West to differentiate between Muslims and jihadists. And in order to give the politicians a way to attack the jihadists without blanket condemnation of Muslims everywhere. But it is a false term, and it doesn't serve the West. Actually, it makes the West vulnerable. Islamism, if you try to define it from a Western perspective, is a political movement that emerged in the mid 20th century that wants to establish the rule of Allah over all the world. But it is a fringe misinterpretation of Islam. It has nothing to do with Islam. It's connected to more. It's more connected to the nationalist German philosophy movement or something like that. It's like, well, that is false. Islamism basically is the foreign policy of Islam. Because again, Islam is not a religion. Islam is a state with a constitution. The constitution is called Sharia, with a foreign policy doctrine. And that doctrine is called jihad, with a financial system that is called zakat, with a population called the Ummah, Muslims everywhere. That is why a Muslim in America feels closer to a Muslim in Indonesia than to a non-Muslim American, because the Ummah belong to each other. So this is number one. Islamism is Islam in action. It's what Islam looks like seriously. Before the fall of the Islamic Caliphate or the Ottoman Empire, the Islamic Caliphate lasted from the days of Muhammad until 1924. So it was the Islamic State that was waging jihad against non-Muslims, but it was official. It was a state leading the way. A state is commanding jihad. That is why it's seen, when you look at history, as just another empire trying to expand. While in reality, it was actually the divinely mandate jihad. After the fall of the Islamic State and the establishment of the nation states across the Islamic world, Muslims who took Islam seriously realized that without a state, there is no Islam. So different groups started practicing jihad, making the decision themselves to wage jihad. So this jihad that is called Islamism in the West is the same old good Islamic jihad that was practiced for 14 centuries since the days of Muhammad. Now, because Islam and communism both are totalitarian ideologies, They don't care about the individual. They collapse the individual into the group. The group is everything, and the group must be controlled in order to serve the higher meaning, which is the state in communism, which is the caliphate or the cause of Allah in Islam. So both of them actually have a shared ground, even though if they disagree on every other thing, but the shared ground is that the enemy is the individualistic based system of the West. So it's all goes down to collectivism versus individualism. Islam and communism, both of them don't care about the individual, don't care about your autonomy, your freedom of conscience. You must vote with the group. You must fight with the group. It's tribalism. It's identity politics. That's why they can work together to take down the Western order in order to establish two different versions of utopia or Islamic State. They don't agree on the end, but they agree on the process. The obstacle to our dream is the Western order, and it must be taken down. So that's why they're working together. They are using each other. The left thinks that Islam could be utilized in order to take down the West, and Islam thinks that the left could be utilized in order to take down the West. So that's what's really happening.
So I think for us in the West, it's hard to differentiate sometimes. Like, right, when you see ISIS, when you see Boko Haram, you're like, okay, clearly that's the bad stuff, right? That's not that's not hard to decipher. But then you see guys in suits. I think of the new quote unquote president of Syria, Erdogan, and it has like a very familiar suit and tie kind of look to it. So help us see the Middle East through an accurate lens. What should we be looking at?
The Middle East is in this current shape because of dictators who are trying to balance their Islamic population with the international order. And that's why the majority of them are pro-West. But at the same time, their people are anti-West. So Muslims, the Muslim population, they look at their own states as illegitimate, Western manufactured systems. And one day Islam will take over, will take all these puppets down, and will take over the world. But for now, because of these Muslim dictators who could not be called Islamophobes, because they're Muslims, they can do whatever they want. So they disable the political aspects of Islam, which is the majority of Islam, and they let Muslims just enjoy the spiritual aspect of Islam, which is like 10%, in order to maintain some kind of stability. So here I'm talking about Jordan, I'm talking about Egypt, I'm talking about Saudi Arabia, countries like the United Arab Emirates. They have like genuine leaders who really want to import the Western system while keeping the Islamic shell. But when we talk about the people, they believe that one day Islam is going to take over the world. So that's how you need to look at the Middle East. When you look at Syria, of course, there are like a lot of political elements at play here. President Trump, short-sighted, unfortunately, he thought that installing a Sunni caliphate or a Sunni state that is supported by Turkey and Saudi Arabia and Qatar in Syria would weaken Iran, the Shia Iran. In Iraq, you have the conflict between Sunni and Shia at play. So it actually, even though there is like one monolithic image you could see the Middle East through, but when you go into details, it's a mess. In every country, it's different. But there's like one recipe, and that recipe is Islam, the supremacy of Islam that is shared across the board, across the Islamic world.
Okay, let's talk about the elephant in the room. If you're watching this on YouTube, you'll see I'm pulling up an image on my phone. It's one of your books, Islam, Israel, and the West. Israel, good night. That seems to be the the thing that, gosh, I don't even know if there's a word for it, but you used to hear specifically in the Islamic world. Now you're starting to hear a lot more in the West, which is the idea of the problem with the Middle East is Israel. If Israel would just go away, we'd have peace in the Middle East. And I know you've written a book about this thing. Where do you view, again, a former devout Muslim who grew up in Jordan, lived in Lebanon? I mean, you check all the boxes. Where does Israel fit into all this?
We are all Israel, my friend. The West is Israel, but we don't know it yet. So Israel is the non-Muslim sovereignty on what is seen as a Muslim land. That's it. Israel has been at war since the beginning because it rejected Islamic sovereignty. As long as non-Muslims live under the Islamic umbrella, they're welcome to live as second-class citizens. Hence the Jews at the beginning of the 20th century. Jews were migrating back to historical Israel, to the land, building cities, building institutions. Tel Aviv was built in 1909, and Muslims had no problem with that at all. There is no objection. If you read history, you wouldn't find objections. Why? Because Jews at the time, they were living under the umbrella of the Islamic Caliphate, the Ottoman Caliphate. So they were seen as, dhimmis. They're second-class citizens. They're not Muslims. They have to adjust to Islamic supremacy. However, once the Caliphate fell, the Muslim world looked at Israel as a theological affront. No non-Muslim sovereignty on an Islamic land. But of course, because this is a religious war, it was masqueraded as a secular cause. So Palestine had to be manufactured as a secular cause. There has never been a state called Palestine. There's no Palestinian people. Palestine was a geographical name of a piece of land. People who lived there were not called Palestinians. They were living in Palestine. Jews living in Palestine, Arabs living in Palestine. So it was just a name of a piece of land. The Arabs who migrated to the land to participate in the prosperity that the Jews brought to the land, suddenly they became the Palestinians. And there again, the state of Palestine it's a lie and was manufactured in 1963 because Muslims had to mask their Islamic cause with a secular name and their jihad with a secular label, resistance, fighting occupation, things like that. So yeah, that's basically what Israel is. And every single country that is not Islamic, if Islam has the power, will be Israel. It will be a non-Islamic country, non-Islamic sovereignty on an Islamic land. Is the United States of America an Islamic land? Of course. Why? Because Allah has given the land to Muslims.
Okay, so I think here's the point that I think a lot of people have a hard time to deal with. The West, in our ego. We've moved on past the Middle Ages. Like, come on, guys. Like, you don't actually want Spain back, right? Like, you don't want the Balkans back. Like, clearly, that's not actually what you guys want. Maybe there's some crazy people in Al Qaeda and Al Shabaab, but then, maybe the Ayatollahs in Iran are a little apocalyptic, but they don't actually want to do that. And I think here in the West, we look at them like, okay, maybe it's just like, some huffing and some puffing, but their goal isn't to quote unquote conquer us, right? Right, Danny?
There is no real Muslim who doesn't want Spain back. Not only Spain, but the entire world. No real Muslim who doesn't believe that Islam will eventually control the entire world. No real Muslim who doesn't believe that the rule of Allah will be established and non-Muslims will be subjugated. No real Muslim. If a Muslim tells you that, no, I don't believe this, he's lying to you. Because a real Muslim believes in what God has commanded. And God in the Quran, he said, anyone who rules with what Allah has not revealed, that is the disbeliever. And what do you do to disbeliever? Fight them until they are humiliated, subjugated, and pay the jizya or die. That is an absolute commandment in the Quran. It's not like, I understand there's a lot of whitewashing of Islam in the West, and Muslims in the West, they mastered the game. They know how to speak the Western vocabularies. They borrowed the left lexicon. They know how to convince you that, oh, we are just, we're compatible with Western order. That is not true at all. Islam is antithetical to the Western order, and Sharia in Islam is a replacement of the US Constitution, of the Western constitutions across the Western order. So that is not an accusation, my friend. I'm not making this up. I'm just telling you what more than 1 billion Muslims worldwide believe. They believe that the rule of Allah will be established politically here in this world. If they don't have the power now, but here's the thing, I want to be fair. Not all Muslims are willing to participate in establishing the rule of Allah. So again, to the first point we talked about, this gap between belief and practice is the difference. The majority of Muslims, they believe it, they wouldn't practice it. Why? Because it's not practical, it's inhumane. It doesn't, it's not compatible with a human life. So, but do they believe it? Yes. Would they vote for people who believe it? Yes. Would they elect officials who believe it and want to practice it? Yes. That is the problem with and the challenge of Islam in the West.
This is just absolutely fascinating insight, my friend. Obviously, we're going to have you back on, but maybe one last question on this episode, which is, let's say there's someone like you, a couple of decades ago, who's starting to question, things like the story you talked about with Muhammad's son-in-law, with Aisha, with, famously the Islamic dilemma. And they're like, hold on a second, wait a second. When it comes to Yeshua, it's like, if you have questions, ask, seek, knock, find. The door will be open for you. Thomas, come. It's an invitation for intimacy. Even the word Israel means to wrestle with God. It's about proximity. It's about relationship. It's about the struggle to it's not just submit and just step away, which I think that the Bible is just, it's so beautiful. But let's say my friend here who is watching is starting to question like you used to be, but they're really scared. If they're in the West, they're scared for obvious reasons, cultural, bringing shame on their family. If they're in the Islamic world, they're actually afraid for their lives for even watching this video. In closing, my friend, what would your encouragement to them be?
Islam nurtures a mentality of slavery, unfortunately, in Muslims. And slaves don't feel they deserve to question their masters. They are to obey their masters. They are to always try to, the wishes of their masters are their commandments. So that is the mentality of Muslims, unfortunately, because of the Quran. The Quran is full of threats and fear and terror and horror. And so my message is to Muslim is this. If you look at yourself as a human being with a real value, with dignity, as the Bible says that you were created in the image of God, and no one gives you that value except God. No one can take it away from you. And your religious affiliation doesn't determine your value. You are valued because, just for the mere reason that you were created in God's image. Of course, that is not an Islamic concept. That is a Judeo-Christian concept. But if you look at yourself that way for a second, you probably would be able to break the chains of Islam. Don't be afraid of hellfire, grave torture, or calamities that Allah would send your way in this world. That is just a bully speaking. The Allah of Islam is a bully. He's not a loving God. He's not a father. And once you're liberated, I can't describe what that is, because you need to experience the liberation yourself.
Wow. Danny Ibrahimoui, thank you so much, my friend, and God bless.
Thank you, Raj.